I'm gonna say this every time, but Lorem's third date is great. It's a date, unlike other dates. I need to remove these old two ones because they're not good. They're both bad intros. But yeah, I don't get why Lorem's third date's suddenly so much better. I wonder if it's experience, like over time, I shouldn't call him a writer because he does more. Sort of had a better idea what he wanted to do, and over time, it got better, but it also sort of lost. Like you have a clear distinction. Like the first few chapters were clearly made to be as appealing as possible, and then the second one was kind of bleh, and then the third one seems to get back into its stride, which is kind of sad. Like if you're ever going to do something like that, and you have a long period of time between the demo and the actual production. Polish up a bit, like keep yourself busy or do a bit of a refresh course by making a first draft you're gonna discard regardless. Like here's the fun part. If you want to write something good, write it and then discard all of it and then try to write it like 10% shorter. And you'll think so much more about what you've done and what you've written than ever before. Especially the 10% one, which I saw in that Sherlock video, and I'm like, yeah, I guess that makes sense. Like, if you force someone to write less, if you force them to cut down, they have to think harder about what they want to keep and what they don't want to keep. Just a little baby writing tip, just a little itty bitty baby writing tip that you could have thought of because you're a smart person and you can do it. You can do what you want. You don't have to write. I'm not telling you have to, but. It's just a nice song, but it's kind of weird, though. Dreams can be weird, though. What? I like how that suddenly just comes up. And there's no other option here. That's... Like, I know no one's gonna see it like this, but this is just weird to think about. The thing I have to consider, though, is... Like, even if the ghosts aren't real, you gotta think about why people commit suicide. Like, does the Force drive you nutters? Or something else? Like, who knows? You know what I would have liked is that every single dragon you meet along your way is like, geez, whoa. They're like, oh man, ooh, wow, human. And even with Damien, who doesn't care, even Damien, who doesn't care, on the first meeting is like, Like he gives you a once over and he's like, so this is a human, huh? Because I can't imagine anyone being, not at least wanting to verify what they're seeing and being like, Creating this awkward setup for every social engagement, really. Well, like either they're interested, or they're put off, or they're somewhat more withdrawn. Who knows? Jesus, what a word, parallel. Yeah, it's the same. Okay. So many L's. Ugh. I like how it's trying to explain. Like, why does Lorem get all this very significant, like, this is how everything works, lore dump? Like, it feels very odd for him to be the character. Like, I imagine that the writing process... Like, here's the thing. You don't have to. You could just hand-wave it with a tiny explanation. You don't have to write everything down scientifically. Like, it's a very big, like, thing people want you to do, but you can just not do it. Fun thing. If you put someone in a situation where they don't know something and you ask them to discover it, they wouldn't have a clue what to do. And that's how it works. People want to know things because of curiosity, and I'm one of those people. I'd be upset. I want to know more stuff. But at the same time, the mystery does kind of give me a certain energy, and you know, it adds something that you can't get by explaining everything. Just like the spooky monster. Don't over-explain the horror, because you'll ruin it. Ugh, itchy. There we go. I'm rewriting this a bit, but all you need to know is that what I'm rewriting is, it's a little bit more to make it less, this is a plot dump, and this is more like Lorem talking about it from the perspective of someone who's heard someone else talk about it. So he adds his own twist to it. It's not much, it's like, oh, that's a lot to talk about. Because it is kind of, it's very weird to start talking about the fundamentals of identity and not be like, oh, that's something to explain. Like, oh. It's just a little touch. That gives a sense of Lorem has to think this one over, because he didn't read this. He heard this from someone else, so he has to recall it and he has to process it. There's parts involved with that. This is such a weird conversation to just have while you're doing a treasure hunt in the forest, which, again, like, it's not weakening the date, because at least it's been set up and something fun has happened before you started talking about all this. That having been said, I don't like how much Lorem is used as a plot dump. Like, there's not enough room for Lorem himself to breathe. I feel the other characters could have carried some weight, too. Yeah, this is starting to go to way too much detail. It's also kind of basically repeating itself a lot, which is the thing that bothers me. At least in the other ones it sort of flowed on, but here it's really trying to simplify something. It's deconstructing it instead of building up. So, I'm again rewriting it a bit. It's not literal, but what I'm trying to do is every speech bubble technically carries the exact same information. It's localized in the sense that I'm taking steps to make it sound more logical as someone who's actually talking instead of someone who's dumping plot on you. So here instead he's like, okay, let's just say there's 3 parts of which you are made. Which is a lot more logical than if we use a similar model here. Then we could say, what? Lorem, you're a human being who makes video games! You're not a scientist! Ipsum can do that because he's a science man who has a fancy degree, but you're a fucking mailman! Don't talk like this! It's weird! Like, you can't have everyone be on level with the player. Have a character that's dumb, and have them be dumb, and have them not understand things. That's how you humanize people more than anything. I understand the whole point, everyone's well educated, but that doesn't mean people use that education in this degree. It's a bit different. Every you and every timeline has a physical body that needs to meet up to certain demands, and those are like the eating, the whole, stay alive. Mind. There's a word I know a good one for. The funny thing is this kind of mirrors the concept of the id, the superego, and the ego. The superego is the concept of social awareness of the greater id, and the ego is the you, and then the id is like your primitive bodily self, I think. I don't know. We can look it up. It'll be fun. Yeah, so this is your body, the supercritical, so that's the greater society. Oh, no, it's a mediation, so it doesn't actually have... That's a weird thing. I guess. Yeah, okay, so the superego is just the unifying you. And the ego itself is the part of you that has experienced everything the body has to say. Like, superego is disconnect... Like, you could say that. You could say the superego is the disconnected part of you that unites all of them. It's the part that makes you you. And over time, it'll change between egos, but it all has the same superego center. Like, what changes over time are the 3 parts, but they all stem from the same original point. on some respect. I like to use this because it makes sense that he would use, you know. So I'm taking this in some way. I'm taking that into, although I don't know how that would happen. You know, adding that sense of, you don't know this shit, Lorem. You don't have nothing to prove it. So it makes sense for them to be like, well, I guess this is just what I'm thinking. You know. I like this. I might rewrite it later because it's a bit off the rails, but normally speaking, the barrier separates timelines and disallows communication. But because of the holes, well, you know where this is going. Letters through the wall, so to speak. Notes through the wall, I should say. Okay, so this is a bit of a rewrite, but I like it a lot. Because again, it captures the slime. It's like, don't forget these are just theories. And that Ipsum knows this better than me. He reads about it. And until an experiment has been performed, it's all speculation, you know? So the thing I like about this is, I like to imagine the portal doesn't actually break timelines. It only does it if you send something back in time that isn't supposed to be able to. Like, linking the portal to itself breaks a wormhole, but trying to teleport to another part in the planet or back in time doesn't necessarily do that. Although, that being said, the portal is technically connected to itself, so that portal will always break timelines. And considering that it happens over infinitely many timelines, the barriers are already infinitely fucked after the first time it happens, which then retroactively affects everything. I like the idea that it retroactively affects things, but only after it happened once, which is a weird way to put it, but that's how it works in my head. It's very unusual, because it goes around the timeline about timelines. You have the timeline where the barrier hasn't broken, where all the timelines are the same, and then at some point it happens and people go back. Then you're at a later part in the timeline of timelines where the timelines are broken because the teleportation has happened and there is a circulation. So now all these timelines are affected by an infinite loop into themselves, but not before. It's really hard to explain. I should probably draw a diagram at some point. But essentially there's a timeline that controls the timelines themselves. So when you go back in time, you can also go back in timeline, which case you would end up in the timeline where none of this has happened yet, and you have none of the premonitions because none of that's happened according to the timeline of timelines, which is a weird way to look at it, but that's kind of interesting. Although then you would create a third level timeline because you would have changed the timeline's timeline. Whee! Is my phone going off? This is a bit different because it doesn't work like this. This isn't me doing this. The biggest problem is, well, realizing it happened at all. It's not exactly clear whether something is a mistake or a communication from another timeline. I think I want to stop. We've done a lot of lines today, and I'm not feeling it too much. I think I'm starting to go off the rails a little too much, and I need to take a break when that happens. Because that's dangerous. That cloud's been hanging there for a while. Dark days. I don't care. I like it when the sun isn't shining too much. Especially if it means the kids go inside. Because the schools have started, and my internship doesn't start for 2 weeks. But frick! I hate how loud children are. I can't stand the little things. Tiny human things.